Welcome. We are in the studio today to do a tutorial for our self-binding table runner. And Katie is behind the camera and I'm Kim with Granny's Legacy Patterns. And you can find us online at grannyslegacypatterns.com. So we have completed the top of the table runner and we are ready to sew this together and have the magic happen. So the first thing we're going to do is mark a 1/4 inch point on each corner. So with a ruler and a marker, some kind of marker, I've used a black Sharpie so it shows on camera, but you can also use a black Sharpie if you used ultra weft because it will not bleed through. So I am marking my 1/4 inch point and a 1/4 inch in on this bottom on each corner. I want to mark this point right here because that is really what makes this whole pattern work. So I have marked all 4 corners and now I'm going to find the center of each piece. So this is my front and I am going to find the center, and you can do this with pins. I like to iron the crease in too, just a little teeny bit to give me a real defining that is the center point. And then I'll do that on all 4 sides. I will find that center point and put that on. My iron is hot, and then there we go. So just about a 1/2 inch is all I need. I only need the 1/4 inch, but I'm gonna give a good place to where those are going to be. Don't try to get it ridiculous or you're going to have a permanent
just enough to make a little mark.
Yep. So, and I like to do this by ironing it because sometimes pins fall out or you can get off a little bit with the pins. Pins can go in a little crooked. But by finding all 4 midpoints, and I'll do the same thing with the back. So here I have my back all cut exactly to size. So I'm going to do the same thing with my back. I'm going to find the midpoints and give a little crease. And the other 2 sides also. So all 4 sides you need to find all 4 midpoints. So accuracy on this table runner is of the utmost importance.
It's easy, but you need to be accurate.
Yes. So take the time and do these steps carefully and your end product will be so amazing. This is such a fun, interesting way to accomplish something that looks so hard and it's so easy. So now I have created all my midpoints. And I'm going to lay this down and I'm going to put midpoint to midpoint. So I've got this iron so I know exactly where it goes. I can line those up exactly precisely. If you would rather use pins, that's a fine way to do it also. But I love this method of just ironing a 1/2 inch piece in there. So now I want this to be really even and good. I want this to be very straightforward, very even. And I'm going to pin in that exact 1/4 inch point that I've marked. And then I'm going to make another one on this end. Now one of these sides I have to leave open to do the turning because it's just like making a, you have to have a turning point. So we have to leave an opening for turning. So when I do that, I use different pins. So I know that when I get to them when I'm sewing, I know that I want to leave from this pin to this pin open. So
I sometimes use double pins. So put 2 pins in because then I'll think, why do I have 2 pins right here?
And that is a good way to mark it too. So I'm going to leave about 8 inches. So I have my sides. I'm going to pin another one here. I want to make sure I use plenty of pins so I don't come undone. So you're going to do that on this side And then we're going to pin this side too, exactly the same way, except for we do not need a turning spot. We don't need a turning spot. This one we're just going to sew from one end to the other. So again, I'm matching up my press lines. If you choose to use pins, that's fine too. But I'm matching these up exactly even. And then making sure that this is...
The nice thing about ironing too is that when you go to match up, they'll nest.
Yes. If you iron...
The one piece falls into the other right in the middle.
Exactly. Yes. That is... I love that part of it too. So you can see when I ironed this, I ironed the right side out. And on this, I ironed the right side in. So that so they would nest. Yes, right side out on the one side and right side out on the other. So one little test thing you can do to make sure you're exactly right is you can reach this up here and make sure you have the same amount left over. And that's a good thing to do, just as your double check to make sure you've done this correctly, and I do. So now I'm going to go to the sewing machine and get these stitched up. So you can follow me over there. And I have a 1/4 inch foot on the sewing machine, a regular stitch length. I'm going to sew a 1/4 inch seam allowance, and I'm going to start my stitching. I gotta get this all even here. I've got it kind of messed up. Okay, I'm going to work with this till I get it right, but my stitching, my first stitch is going to start right in that X, right in the center of the X. X marks the spot. I'm not going to go into this seam allowance at all. I'm going to start and back up a couple stitches and then go again. But I do not want to back up into that seam allowance. I want to stay inside.
So you're leaving a 1/4 inch at the beginning unstitched.
Unstitched. That is very important, that's exactly a 1/4 inch and that you leave it unstitched. So I'm going to start right here. I'm going to back up a couple stitches. And I want my needle down. There we go. So as we go, I'm going to keep going. And when I get to that opening, keep in mind, as you go, to make sure you get your seam allowances lined up exactly even, because that is going to determine how your project finishes. And I've got to the center point here. Now I'm coming up to that odd pin, so that's reminding me that, okay, I have to leave an opening. So I'm going to back up and I'm going to skip ahead to my next point. And I just pull my thread right through and skip to the next, and then I go back and trim those threads later. But I start again. And now when I come to the end, I want to make sure that I stop at the X marks the spot. I do not want to go into the seam allowance past that pin.
So you're leaving a 1/4 inch unsewn at the end as well.
Yes, I did. So now, as I say, I go back and I just trim those threads out of the way, and I'm ready to go. So I will do this exact same method. I will do the same method on this side. I do not leave a turning point on either of the other sides. I'll do the same method on the ends. So I will meet you back here in a minute and we'll do one end to see how that goes. Okay, we're back and we're going to do the two ends now. So we've got one long side sewn, no hole for turning, one long side sewn with a 8-inch hole for turning. Now we're going to work on these ends. So once again, I have my midpoint, and I'm going to mark it with a pin so you can see it on the camera, because you probably can't see that fold that I've ironed in there. And then I have one here, so I'll mark that, and I'll bring that fold right up to this. So we're going to pin those two together. And I can kind of, when you have those folds in there, your thumb and finger can kind of feel exactly when they nest. And then I'll make sure that I don't have anything tucked in there in the inside. I want to have this perfectly flat to this corner. I don't know if that's showing up on camera, Katie,
Yep.
Is it? Okay. So I've made sure that any of this bulk is pulled out of my seam allowance.
And it kind of leaves an ear. And that's right.
A funny little ear sticking out there. And then I'll do the same thing on this side. I'm going to pin it and make sure that I have any of the extra fabric that creates your self-binding out of the way. And I'll pin that.
And you're making sure that, yep.
So I have a clear seam allowance on both sides. I don't have any of this sticking in there that's going to get caught. I want to make sure of that. So we pin the other end exactly the same way. So I'm going to flip it over here. We're going to match the center points. And once again, if you've chosen to iron those in there, you can actually feel when they're nesting. And then I'll make sure that I have no extra fabric in my seam allowance. I'll pull those out of the way. And make sure that this is all even and nice. Actually, you can almost pin as you go. And stick my finger in there and make sure that there's nothing in that seam allowance. Put a pin there exactly where I'm going to start, where X marks the spot. Do the same thing on this side. Make sure it's set out even and nice. And you can tell we've used Ultra Weft stabilizer on the back of our front piece to give it a little extra oomph when we're doing that applique. So that is what the cream color is our stabilizer. So I'm going to take this to the sewing machine and sew from the X to the X on both ends. And I'll meet you back here in a flash. We are back. We have our ends stitched also. So we have these funny little holy ears sticking out. Looks like little puppy dog ears sticking out. So now is the fun part. So now we are going to take and we fold.
Are you going to check it first, or you just know you did it right?
Well, I'll stitch it and check it. Yeah. So I will fold these two seam lines together. So I'm taking one of the ears and I'm just taking and folding that one seam over to the other seam. And to make sure that I have this exactly the points lined up, I'm going to take my pin and I'm going to make sure those X's on the inside are exactly where they're supposed to be, which they are. So I'm going to put a pin in that, and I'm going to make sure that the seam allowances are exactly even here. So I'm going to put a pin there also.
So the first pin, or the blue pin, is going right where you started sewing or stopped sewing.
Right in the X marks the spot part. So
inch,
now I'm making sure my ear comes out correctly, and it's a little off here, but I'm not concerned about so much that this is wrong. I want to make sure that this line here is straight, so I'll choose the one that's straight with this and straight with the 45-degree angle. So I'll find my 45-degree angle and I'll lay this on here, and I see that this inside seam, I'll mark the one, or inside edge is the one that's right. So somewhere you may have a point that comes off not quite exactly right. I did this so that you can see that this line here follows through with this, this is perfectly on a 45. Does the 45 show on the camera? So we have a 45-degree angle here. We've got a perfectly 90-degree angle here. Now we have to create a 45 to stitch here. So using the 45 on this line here, I'm going to take a chalk pencil and I'm going to mark that spot right here so you can see it on camera.
Perfect.
Okay, this is a 45. I'm going to put that right on the correct line here, this one right here. So I'm going to line it up with this. See, this lines up exactly straight here. So I'm going to put my 45 there. And when you do that, you will notice that this line here is exactly on a 90. So you're still all squared up perfectly. I'm going to take it and make a mark. And then I'm going to stitch right through there, right ending it there.
Stitching on the marked line.
Stitching on the mark line, ending at that dot. So I'm going to put a couple pins in this, and I'm going to show it again on another corner. We'll see if I did any better on another corner. So I'm marking this to my stitching line. I'm going to put a few pins in there because I do not want that to come apart. So I'm actually going to pin it one more time and get this all pinned right. Now I'm going to grab another corner and let's do this again. So I have my dog ear. I have the 2 seam allowances. I'm going to fold this. I'm going to grab hold of that exact corner and I'm going to pull this up and just fold that right in half. And when I have that exactly correct and no wrinkles underneath, and you can kind of feel if you have wrinkles, keep working and working and working till you have no wrinkles. And look at this one, turned out exactly perfect. So we're ready to go. So I'm going to check this point here, make sure that the front and the back come together at the exact right spot, and they do. And I'll put a pin in there, and I will put a little piece of chalk dot right here. There we are. Now I will take and mark this one the same way. So I've got exactly a straight line here, and I've got my 45, and to double check that, I'm going to lay this on here, and this is exactly 90 and 45. So by putting this on here, so 45 on the seam line and 90 here, then I'm going to take and draw my line exactly straight and pin, and I'll be ready to take this all 4 corners to the sewing machine and get these sewn up. So I will meet you back here in a flash after I have these sewn up. Thank you. So we have all the stitching done. We have the corners stitched, and a good way to check to make sure your corners are correct is lay it down, and if it looks like the corner comes to a perfect point with the ear sticking up, you know that it is correct. So we can check all 4 corners here and make sure they all lay down and make a point. And if they do, we're good to cut them off and carry on with the next step. So I've got 4 corners that lay very nicely. So I'm going to trim the seam to a 1/4 inch seam allowance. So that's pretty straightforward. And then where the point is, I like to just go back and trim that to be about 1/8 of an inch. So get a little bit more bulk out of that corner. So
and that's just so it turns nicely and it's nice and crisp inside.
Yep, so when it turns, you won't have a rounded corner. Our goal is to have a nice sharp point in that corner. So I'm going to continue and do all 4 corners like this, and then we're going to turn it and see the results of our I'm just going to grade down to that corner. And another 1/4 inch. And I'm just guessing at the 1/4 inch. I'm not, you can take it to your rotary mat and do a true 1/4 inch if you want. So now it is the fun part. You reach inside. If you kind of put your finger in that point, you can poke it right through and work it a little bit, and it should be perfect. I was going to do one thing before that. I forgot. We're going to go back. So it almost works best if you press these seam allowances before you turn it. So I'm going to try to make everything flat and nice. Now I'm not going to press out here on the folded edge. I'm only going to press here where the seam allowance is. So I'm going to pull my seam allowance and make sure it's nice and flat. And then I'm going to press that out. And I'm going to use a little steam, because if we get this pressed ahead of time, when we turn it, it'll just do its own thing. It'll be just perfect. So I'm staying away from the outer edge. I'm staying away from that. This, I do not want to press that. And then when you get to this, I try to press exactly a 1/4 inch on this too, so that,
and that's your opening.
that's my opening, yes. So even if I have to pin it, or I just try to make sure that I get that pressed in there too. I almost forgot this step, and this is like really important. And the other thing I like to do is on these corners, I like to press this corner seam open. So if I press this open and this flat, when it turns, it's going to be so perfectly beautiful. So I'll do another one here so you can see this. I press that seam open. It's not behaving for me. It's not wanting to open up. It wants to be folded in half. There we go. So I will press that open. And this perfectly flat. And I did accidentally get into that, but I'm going to show this again to the camera. So I have pressed this perfectly flat and this seam open. Good. I'm going to do all 4 like that. I tend to work up here better where I'm. There we go. Got a lot of steam going. I usually don't have quite that much steam, but it seems like my iron's going to be doing double steam work today. So some of them are behaving for me and some not so much. Now we'll go ahead and turn. Stick my finger in that point, pull it through, stick it in the point, pull it through. All of these pulled out, and it's just amazing how easily it lays flat once you get these corners where they need to be. And half of the work has been done for you because we've pressed that seam. And see, by pressing that seam the way it's supposed to go, it just lays right there just perfectly. In the corners, because we press those seam allowances open, you can just work them with your finger and your thumb a little bit. If you have to poke a little a crochet hook in the corner, that sometimes will help too. A little something pokey, not my scissors. I have learned my lesson the hard way by using the scissor point. You can go right through the end and ruin your perfectly nice corner. So now when we have all 4 corners exactly the way you want them, and you want to take your time and work them open so they lay flat and nice. You can see how beautifully that lays. Just like that. It's simple as that. Now we have our opening here. And we just make sure that that's overlapping 1/4 of an inch. And you might have to work it back and forth a little bit because you want it to be, you want your binding, your border to be exactly the same all the way around. So when I get it just the way I would like it, and I'm going to take and press it open one more time. Sometimes when you press from the inside, it may not have pressed exactly the way you'd like it to. So you have this one last chance to get everything pressed the way you'd like it. And then after I get everything exactly perfect, just the way I'd like it, whew, so my opening is here. I'll put a couple pins in there to hold that because I really want that to stay together. I don't want that to open up. Now I will take this to the sewing machine and I will sew 1/8 of an inch top stitch all the way around on the border through that seam allowance. All the way around, and by doing that it will stitch your hole shut and your border is completed, your runner is complete, perfect mitered corners, beautifully finished back, and a lovely table runner. So I hope you enjoyed this project and happy stitching.